Hi, this is Tim. I recently made a video, it might actually come out after this video, about making a big spiral road in Space Engineers. I just kind of threaded the Martian surface. This is the math behind how I did it. I'm making its own video because it's about 20 minutes long. As always, if you like the video, please thumbs up, subscribe, share it with your friends. Yeah, hope you enjoy. Thanks for watching. Alright, so basically comes down to wanting to make a helix. So when you've got a helix, you look at it, it's beautiful. The helix is just really like a long triangle, sort of. So like you can look at it and say you've got a triangle here. So you have a drop and a run. And whatever that angle is right there, that angle is going to be your helix angle. And this is going to be how you can calculate this. So the first thing you need to know is your angular velocity. So you have omega, which equals your angular velocity. And excuse my handwriting, I'm very out of practice on a Wacom tablet. So angular velocity, which in this case is going to equal our RPM times 2 pi 60 radians. So that will give us our angular velocity in radians per second. So omega radians per second. And then the next thing you need to remember is that your linear velocity at the tip of something rotating is equal to, so v linear is equal to r, your radius, times omega. So what is the radius? The radius is going to be the distance from your center line where you're spinning of whatever you're cutting with. So in this case, we had, that was not straight. Let's try this again. So in this case, shift key, we had a line of pistons like this. And then we had a rotor down here. And then right here, we had a line that came out. Then we had a bunch of drills right here. Let's just make it look like it was, I don't know, that many drills. So what our radius actually is going to be the center. So the center of this block, so not the edge of the block, but the center of the block, to the outside. It's this distance right here. This is R. And in my case, R equaled 19.5. 19.5 blocks. And this is important because a block is 2.5 meters long. I hope. Otherwise, my math was all wrong and somehow it worked out. That was the crappiest M. All right. So now we've got this. So we can say that our radius equals 19.5 blocks times 2.5 meters per one block. Blocks cancel. Radius equals, let me pull up a calculator. I don't think I have this number by itself anywhere. I don't. So the radius will equal 48.75 meters. All right, so we've got our radius now. which is this component, our angular velocity is easy. That's what we set the RPM to. So you can just kind of look at it and say, all right, what seems safe and won't explode to death? I started off with 1 RPM. I then went to half an RPM, and I finally finished at 1/4 RPM, 0.25 RPM. And I did that because the plunge depth was too fast and it wasn't cutting. If I was to do this again, I'd probably slow it down to 1/8 of an RPM, and I might not have to use the wheel. So let's look at that real quick. What we've got is a triangle, and we're trying to make, come on, triangle. We're trying to make this angle right there 5 degrees. And with this being 5 degrees, we can figure out what this needs to be based on what this is. And this is our omega. And this is going to be called our, actually this is not omega, I'm sorry. This is our V linear. This is going to be called our piston speed for now. Where this triangle comes from is it's just this triangle here, and how you can figure out what these would be is if you looked at the path from the side, that was the straightest freehand circle I've ever drawn, or the most circular freehand circle I've ever drawn in my life. I'm so happy I recorded that. Anyway, that aside. So in the center of this, you've got your rotors, and then you've got this arm. Well, at the end of that, you've got a tangential velocity right here. This is the velocity of this little point right here in the direction it's currently moving, which in this case is along this red arrow. That is determined from the length of, that's an R, the length of this radius, and your angular velocity, which is the velocity that this thing is spinning at, which is your omega, which equals the RPM converted to radians per second. So actually, let's cross out RPM, and we want to put rads per second, radians per second. So there are 2 pi radians in a revolution, which is how you can convert that up here to radians per second just by multiplying it by 2 pi, and then 60 is just the seconds in 1 minute. So if you were to actually fully write this out, you would have rev per minute times 1 minute, 60 seconds, times, there should be a 2 there, 2 pi radians in 1 rev. That's a V. Revs cancel, minutes cancel, and you're left with 2 pi radians per 60 seconds. So that's the conversion, and that's why that works. So anyway, what we're solving for is this tangential velocity, because that right here, go back to our red, this guy right here is this guy. So this tangential velocity is the same as this on this triangle we're trying to solve. So once we have that, we can then solve for our piston feed with just simple trig. So tangent of theta equals opposite over adjacent. This one is adjacent. This one's opposite because here's our angle. Adjacent side, opposite side. So in this case, we know what A is. So tangent of theta equals O over A. I already wrote that. We wrote it again. tangent of 5 degrees equals PF over VLIN, or V linear, which is again the tangential velocity, which we found from our RPM. So we just solve this for PF. That's really easy. Bring the V linear over here. Whoops. It's really easy, and he screws it up. Put tangent 5 over there. Let's go ahead and erase this so maybe it's a little bit easier to see. I'll put a new T there. Here we go. So tangent 5 degrees equals PF. And now we just pop that into a calculator. And you have... actually, so it's a little bit longer than this. I can't pop it into a calculator yet because I have to calculate V linear, which I have not done yet. Because V linear is a function of R over here, which we have calculated. So what does this equal? Well, V linear equals, as we said up here, R times omega. So this is actually V linear equals 48.75 meters. And that's going to be times 0.25 RPM. And that is going to be times 2 pi, I'm running out of space, 60 radians per second. And that is going to equal, now calculator time, 48.75 times 0.25 times 2 pi over 60. So that's going to equal 1.276 meters per second. So this arrow right here is 1.276 meters per second. That is the tangential velocity of this point at one instance in time. Now, because these are vectors, you can just use trig. That's an important thing, by the way. Sorry, I should have mentioned that before. This only works because we're using vectors. So you can use regular trig to add, subtract, decompose vectors. In this case, we're combining these vectors to make this angle. So now we can take this and we can pop it in here for VLN. So 1, 2, 7, 6, tangent 5 degrees. Now we can do this, tangent in the calculator, 5. And this is going to equal 0.1117 meters per second. So this here, piston feed, is 1117 meters per second. We're not done yet. We have one more thing we have to do. So we found the vertical that we need, or the vertical speed we need to use, but we don't just have one piston. And this is really important. We have a bunch of pistons. And if you just select all pistons and set it to this speed, you're gonna have a really bad time. And so are your pistons and your drills, and whatever happens to be underneath them. So what you actually need to do is take your piston feed speed and you want to divide it by the number of pistons. What this does is it basically says that, okay, in my case I had 23 pistons. So piston count equals 23. So in my case, what that does is it basically says, okay, as one piston is actually extending and it's pushing another piston, which is also extending, this sort of extending while it's extending other things that are extending, it all kind of compounds. And so by dividing it by the number of things that are moving, you can get a relative velocity at the very end piston point. And that needs to equal this, because that will be the velocity that this arm, that's a terrible place to draw that line, that this arm will go down that's the relative velocity at the end. And that's a relative velocity to the top of the hole, basically. It's only going to be extending at this speed relative to the stationary edge of the wall. It's relative physics, I guess, is reference frames. It's kind of confusing. So all you need to worry about is just take your speed that you want your drill arm to be moving, divide it by your number of pistons. So in my case, piston feed speed, 1117 divided by 23, PF equals, I think it was 0.4. Let's see. Divided by 23 is 0.0049 meters per second. I was rounding it to 5 because it's Space Engineers, it's fine. It's not a real space anything. Meters per second. So what I would do is I would have the rotor right here. It was set to 0.25 RPM. All of these pistons were selected all and set to 0.005 meters per second. And away it went. The only other thing that I did was, if you were to look at this from the side, I angled the drills downwards relative to the arm. And the angle, in this case it's this angle right here, the angle down from horizontal was 7.5 degrees. In a perfect world it would be 5 degrees, but I did 7.5 because the drills, if you look at the drill, looks kind of like this, sort of. And it makes a hole that's kind of like, you know, this big, let's say. Well, it was hitting over here. And because it was hitting over here, if you angle it down some, and you make it cut kind of here, this is exaggerated, the hole it makes is kind of like this. And then as it makes this hole, it ends up clearing the corner, or it should in theory. It didn't really, so I put a wheel on the back. But I think if I slowed it down, it would work better. And this basically just gave it some clearance. And because it was only 2.5 degrees, which at a shallow angle is kind of a lot, but because it was only a little bit, it ended up working nicely to kind of clear out a lot of the dirt that was getting caught underneath the drills when they were just at 5 degrees. And that's the math behind how I figured it out. You don't have to do the math. You could just use trial and error. But using the math was, I think, significantly... I think it significantly cut down a lot of trial and error time once I realized that I couldn't just do it all in one shot, and I had to bore a hole first. Anyway, hope that helped. If you liked it, subscribe. Eventually I'll have more engineering content like this on this channel, but until then there'll be probably more Space Engineer, Skyrim, and sim racing. So if you liked the video, subscribe, thumbs up, share it with your friends, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.